Welcome back to Step Into a Story. This is episode number 4, and my guest today is Shawn David Brink. Do you go by David now instead of Shawn D?
I'm going through a little bit of an identity crisis.
Oh, no.
I was always Shawn D. Brink. But my latest book, has gone under Shawn David Brink.
Yeah, I noticed that.
The publisher, that was the publisher's decision. They wanted to differentiate from my other books. So,
Oh, interesting. Okay.
I think I'm going to still be Shawn D. Brink, but for purposes of the new book, I guess I'm Shawn David Brink.
Okay, so just for this one. So a brief introduction to Shawn is he was born in Clovis, New Mexico, but he's lived in Nebraska since age 5, and you still live there now, don't you?
Yes.
Okay. He has been writing fiction since he was old enough to hold a pencil and telling stories before that. When he's not writing, Shawn keeps busy with his family and church and plays guitar, which I don't think I knew about you before.
Oh, about the guitar?
Yeah. I think that's a new addition to your website. I don't remember ever seeing that before.
It's always been on there, but I mean, I've always known you as in a writer capacity, so maybe that's
right. Well, I wonder if you might have sent me your bio before, and I might just never have gone to take your information straight off your website. That might be what happened.
That's the thing. I don't usually put on my bio because I figure it's not really relevant to my writing.
Yeah, but people find it interesting, as obviously I do. So he has an undergraduate degree from Wayne State College and a graduate degree from Bellevue University. Shawn is currently building a following with 5 novels to his name, the latest being Pets for Legion. He also has numerous shorter works in various publications and anthologies. So for a complete list, you can go to his website, ShawnBrinkAuthor.wordpress.com. And you are now represented by Liverman Literary Agency. So, welcome, Shawn.
So, nice to be here.
The first thing, can you give an intro? We've talked in the past, you've been on my program, Books and Brews, and we talked about my Gypsy War Diary, right?
Yes.
On that program. So today we're talking about Pets for Legion, your newest novel. If you want to give our writers a bit of an introduction to that.
Yeah, so Pets for Legion is a little bit of a departure from what I've done in the past. I've written fantasy fiction, I've written suspense, I've written young adult. This is my first, what I would call, true horror novel. So it's kind of a dive into a new genre for me. And the book, essentially, it's based around the biblical story about the legion of demons that Jesus casts out of the man instead of the herd of pigs. And the question is, where did the legion of demons go after they ran after the pigs into the lake and were drowned? I mean, the story says the pigs were drowned in the lake, so what happened to the demons after that? And so this story picks up with them actually living under a town in northern Iowa. And that's the premise for Pets.
I have to ask why Iowa? Do you think that's like a place that demons would go?
Well, here's the thing. Being a Nebraskan, it's not a serious rivalry, but I live on the eastern side of Nebraska, so I'm just over the border from Iowa. And so there's always been this idea that Nebraskans are better than Iowans if you're in Nebraska, and vice versa. Well, I would get kicked out of the state if I put it in Nebraska, so I had to put it in Iowa.
That's hilarious. There's actually kind of the same thing between Minnesota and Iowa. I'm afraid we mock Iowans, which is terrible. It's actually a lovely place, and my son and daughter-in-law live there, and it's a wonderful place.
I have lots of friends in Iowa, so I don't mean anything serious by it.
That's too funny. So, my first question is, you tend to write in a lot of what I would call the darker genres, especially when I was looking at your website. It was saying you write horror, you write thrillers, suspense, supernatural. You don't do the light and cheerful fluff topics. What draws you to those sorts of topics, and what do you think draws us as readers and, just people in general? We seem drawn to these things. Why do you think that is?
Oh, wow, that's a good question. I mean, as far as, that's a two-part question. So first of all, you're asking what drew me to that.
Yep.
I just grew up loving like the 80s horror genre. A lot of the dark stuff is really what got me because I think when you're looking at something really dark, then you have such a something that's so evil that you have to have such a powerful protagonist to go against it, and that's
Mm-hmm.
really always drawn me in. But I was always a fan of like the 1980s Stephen King
Okay.
novels, all that kind of stuff. So that's what kind of drew me in. Is just that's just been always a draw for me, that super dark antagonist that has to be overcome by a super light protagonist. And
Right.
then, what was the second part of the question? What
What
draws
draws
me?
us? I mean, I think people in general are drawn to these dark and mysterious things. And why do you think we are? You know, shouldn't we be drawn to light and happy and cheerful?
I think the light, happy, and cheerful is kind of ingrained in humanity anyway, to a certain
Mm-hmm.
extent. Not that there's nothing dark or evil in the world, but I think people generally want to be good people. I
Mm-hmm.
think people generally want to be nice to each other. Um, but the darkness is inside of all of us to a certain extent, and it's
Mm-hmm.
something we generally try to hide. We don't tend to portray who we might be from a darker side of things.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so to me, that's always intrigued me and made great ideas for what might happen if that darkness came out.
Right. I like that answer, and I think you're right. I mean, it's something I haven't necessarily thought about a lot, but I've been putting together a collection of some of my short stories, and it was a question that came up in my mind, given that a lot of what I write in short stories is a little bit more paranormal, ghostly, things like that. So, it's a really heavy hitting book. I read it last week, and it's not like my Gypsy War Diary at all. So you started from this biblical story of the demons, and how did you go from this basic question of what happened to them to the very specific idea of Legion being under a house, of controlling people, of all that happens in this book?
You know, I mean, obviously the start was from the story about Jesus casting out the legion of demons. And from there, it just kind of morphed into something totally outside of, I mean, the story is biblical. Everything beyond that is total fiction, what I wrote.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying that I believe there's actually a legion of demons in Iowa, but it just morphed out of that. And I mean, some of the characters that I've written in the story, like the chief, which is the main antagonist in the story, or one of them, I've
Mm-hmm.
had that character in my mind for years. I was just looking for a place to put him. And
Interesting.
so, yeah, so, and that's kind of the way I write a lot of books. I have the characters all kind of, I never really write outlines of characters and bios and everything when I get ready to
Mm-hmm.
write a book because I already have the biographies of all the main
Mm-hmm.
characters. I've written them years ago, and they're just waiting for a plot to be put into.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and so a lot of these characters I wrote just waiting for something to come up where they would fit well. And as I started developing the idea of this northern Iowa town with the demons underneath it, it just kind of fell into place with the characters I already had in my head. So
You know, one of the characters I was really curious about, and this is, I suppose, in a sense, a two-part question. It was, do you pronounce it Mr. Collar?
oh, Mr. Kaler, yeah.
Taylor. So he, I wondered if you planned him out this way. Are you a plotter or a pantser? And did you know when you started writing Mr. Kaler that where he would end up? And I don't want to give spoilers, but did you know from the start of the book where he was going to end up and what he would do?
I did, yeah. So again, I don't write out my outlines,
Mm-hmm.
but I have all the main ideas of the twists, such as what we're talking about that we can't
Right.
talk about.
Right.
um,
Right.
that was already in my head, so I knew that that was going to be a key spoiler, I guess, if I said it, on what happened to Mr. Kaler throughout the book. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, so I already had that in mind. A lot of the finer details just kind of came as I wrote, but a lot of the main things like that, I
Mm-hmm.
already had in mind what was going to happen.
One thing I was curious about, this is, in a sense, it's a story of revenge. It's a story of why someone lets themselves go to this very dark place. And this is a man who's taking revenge on everybody that he thinks ever wronged him. And so it seems this is a relatively small town. It seems like maybe an unusual number of children are going missing in this small town.
Mhm.
Do the people ever like go, what's going on?
Well, that's the thing, and you find this as you read through the book, but because the demons are controlling the town essentially,
Hmm.
they can put a certain amount of blinders over
Hmm.
the weak-willed citizens of the town. That's not to say that everyone's completely blind to it, but enough of the population is that they, although they see it, although they mourn the loss of the children, they're not necessarily doing anything about it.
Right.
I don't know if you. This isn't really something that I've connected with it, but I've recently read one of the longest novels I've ever read in my life,
Mhm.
um, Stephen King's It. And if you ever read that novel, it's kind of the same idea that the
Okay.
people in the town of Derry, Maine, are kind of blinded to the whole idea that there's a whole evil living there, and they're
Hmm.
saddened by things that are happening in the town, but they don't really act on it because they're kind of blinded to it to a certain degree.
Right, right. And I do think you did a good job bringing that out. There was a brief moment where I was like, it seems like he's going after a lot of people in this town. And that means their kids are going missing. And yet I do think that you brought that out. I mean, you mentioned it specifically that the demons are blinding them. Now, it's probably partly because not only am I a mother, I'm also a mother of twins, and so I was very invested in what happened to Daniel's twin. And as a reader, I think we're very used to people being rescued, and I expected there to be a rescue. But the flip side of that is, as readers, we can also feel that it gets too pat, that, everything always works out. And in real life, things don't always work out. So I was curious about your decision as to the twins' fate. Did you consider both options?
Yeah, I did. That was actually really hard for me to write.
Mm-hmm.
For kind of the same reasons you'd mentioned. I'm also a parent of four kids,
Mm-hmm.
and this this book deals a lot with um, children being abducted by the antagonist, and the, really the reason I wrote it. The bottom line is, I mean, and really, you've read a number of my books. I know you know this, that
Right.
my stories never end up completely happy in the end. There's got to be
Mm-hmm.
things that happen. The characters learn and they grow, but not all only because everything works out 100% in the end. There's always a little bit of pain there in the
Mm-hmm.
process as well. And I guess, to have everyone be rescued and no one get hurt, to me, doesn't. I've never been drawn to those 100% happy ending stories. I guess is
Right.
all I can say.
I don't think they feel realistic because, as I said, most readers, I mean, I think some people want that. They want an escape.
On the other, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, but I think there are plenty of other readers who feel that it's unrealistic if everything just works out perfectly.
Well, yeah, and I was going to say on the other side of the coin, I've always been disgusted by stories that are complete downers as well.
Hmm.
And this is just my personal opinion, but this is really dating me because it's a long time ago. But I went and saw the movie Seven. I don't know if you ever saw that movie.
No.
Oh, and I won't want to give you spoilers if anyone ever wants to watch a 30-year-old film, but
Hmm.
it's I actually left the theater just disgusted because it was one of them where I saw no light at the end of the tunnel.
Hmm.
Everyone lost. There was no happiness at all. And I
Yeah.
can't go that direction either, but I do like to be somewhere in the middle. And
Right.
actually, I think my books tend to be towards the lighter side, really. I mean, there's a lot of happiness, a lot of fulfillment at the end. There's just not going to be a perfect amount of everything came together just right and perfect and
Right.
everyone's
Yeah.
happy. And
That nice balance. Now, the chief is an interesting example of an unreliable narrator. And one of the first things we hear him thinking is how most people wouldn't appreciate the dark parts of his life because most people don't share his history. But as I was reading the book, I thought, he's fooling himself because his horrible dark history is that he was bullied as a child. And I don't think that's that uncommon a story. So are we meant to get from this that he's making excuses for something that maybe he really wanted to do anyway?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing that I always have to keep in mind when I was writing the chief is he's the bad guy in this book,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't want him to ever be really placed as a total victim. He was a victim. He was
Mm-hmm.
bullied as a child, but the older I'm getting, I guess I realize that everyone has struggles in their life, and
Mm-hmm.
really what his downfall was he focused on his downfalls in his life and the things that he had to deal with when he was younger, and was very, I guess, egocentric in that he thought he was the only one that had these struggles during his
Right.
life.
Right.
And
Very
so that
focused
kind
on
of warped
himself.
his brain, got him a little bit crazy, and
Mm-hmm.
ended up kind of going down a dark path.
Right. Now, you bring in, I kind of hate to say this because it's maybe giving away a spoiler, but you bring in this idea of a golem, which, as far as I know, is very much a Hebrew concept. But you brought it into Christian fiction. Why did you go that route?
Well, yeah, I mean, I took my own twist on it. I'm not a scholar of Jewish mythology necessarily, but I'd come across the idea of a golem years ago in reading another novel. Someone had a golem character, and I said, "Well, what is that?" So I studied up on it.
Mm-hmm.
And very interesting, idea of basically a creature that's been animated through various spells and incantations. But he's not a real person. He's made out of clay. But golems are generally, protective. They're loyal, but they're not real intelligent creatures.
Mm-hmm.
And I just always kind of, again, it was another character that I had learned about years and years ago and just stuck him away until I had a
Uh-huh.
great plot to put him into. The Gollum character, I think it fits okay into Christian fiction, especially since I changed it a little bit too. I mean, this Gollum, what was given its power through the demons that live under the city. So it's a little
Mm-hmm.
bit different than the Hebrew version as well. So I thought
Right.
it fit nicely into what I was wanting to use him for, so I stuck him in.
Yeah, he works well in this, and he makes a great foe for our heroine to fight against. So I'm going back to Mr. Keeler a little bit. I expected him to make one choice, and he seemed to have been set up to make this choice, and yet he made the opposite in the end. Did you intend that, or did he just sort of, write himself, and or why did that happen?
That's hard to explain too much without giving away
Mm-hmm.
too much. Um, Obviously, Mr. Taylor plays a role in this book. Um, Gosh, it's hard to say how to explain that without. Um, yeah, I mean, the decisions he made, again, kind of the overall theme, when you're looking at these characters, is what cards were they dealt and how did they deal with them?
Mm-hmm.
And in both the case of the Chief and Mr. Taylor, they ended up getting sucked into something that maybe they should have done well to go another path, if
Mm-hmm.
that makes sense. I can't really talk too much about it because I don't want to give away too much of what happened.
Yeah, and next question would actually force you to give a spoiler, so I'm not going to ask that question.
Okay.
I have my own ideas about why he chose as he did when it seemed that he was going the opposite way, but I think I'd rather not give spoilers either because it is quite a surprise. It's a very big surprise twist at the end. So this book has instances of a lot of divine guidance, and it's not necessarily in obvious ways, but in people just they suddenly have a strong feeling or the right person happens across their path. The pastor Xavier, who comes into it, he opens his door in the middle of the night, not sure why he's really doing that. And I think a lot of times that's really more how divine guidance does work. It's much more subtle. But I'm curious, were some of these things based on your personal experiences?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, being a Christian and just going through life, if you have a relationship with Jesus, you do have these moments. Um, Yeah, where you're feeling guided. Now, you always have to test the spirits and weigh it against the Word of God, the Bible.
Right.
But there's been times when I've been guided in different situations. There's a number of years ago. I think I told you this before, but I can't remember. It's been, gosh, over 10 years now since this all started. But my wife got diagnosed with cancer about
I,
more than.
no,
I
I
never
don't
told
think
you.
you ever told me.
Oh,
I don't think so.
yeah, yeah. Actually, yeah, she was diagnosed with cancer, leukemia, and just the stress, everything at the time. I was 37 years old. We had
Hmm.
4 kids between the ages of 10 and like 4. And so just the stress of all that going on, those are the times when I think you feel the influence of God more when you really, really need to have that guidance.
Hmm.
And there were times that I just was being guided what to do in certain situations,
Hmm.
and you feel that, and God's always there for you. So
Yeah. I think that's one of the things I like about your books. Some Christian fiction I've read, I feel it's kind of unrealistic, that it's too much God always intervening in this big and obvious way. And I think your approach is much more true to what really happens. That sometimes we do, about maybe, let's see, it was in April of 2017, I had a very dramatic event, which I'm not going into, where I very clearly heard something. And there were a lot of questions. It was a situation where what I very clearly heard absolutely could not have happened. It should not have been possible. And yet it came to pass exactly as I heard, but I think that's unusual. And
mhm.
I think a lot more is these little inclinations, this little urging, this kind of inner voice pushing you to do something. You need to go here, and you're going, why am I doing this? But if you follow it, all of a sudden you find out there was a reason and you really were being led. So there's a question throughout this book, both from the chief and from Legion. Why wasn't Sasha affected by their influence like everyone else in the town? And you never do say in the book why. So why is she more powerful than anyone else in this town? And why doesn't she succumb to this blindness that Legion has cast over everyone else?
Well, again, you're right. I didn't make it as clear, and maybe I should have made it a little clearer. I'm not sure, but really, it came down to divine intervention once again, and God's plan of the whole thing.
Hmm.
And again, if you look at your own life, like you were saying, and when I look at my life, there were times when I was being guided ways so that I would learn or change or grow as a person through God, and you don't see it till years later sometimes. And that's
Hmm.
kind of the situation with Sasha. She was in an abusive relationship. She was she had made the decision in the beginning of the book that she wasn't going to stand in a life of fear anymore.
Hmm.
And really, God used her to grow out of that and become more solid in her ability to stand firm in her faith.
Hmm. Yeah, actually, it's interesting you mentioned that because the person I will be talking to next week, she wrote a time travel book, and I want to say it's called Flight of the Stork. And her book kind of delves into that too, that there's a little bit of heavenly intervention, and it's actually for two people both to learn from each other and
Mhm.
grow. So it's kind of neat that you mentioned that, and that ties into next week's interview. So I wanted to ask, just a question too on the writing craft. How do you pronounce the name of the town? Is it Getride?
Um, that's I pronounced in my head as I wrote it. I was pronouncing Gertrude.
Getride.
But really, what Gertrude is, it's German for grain.
Really?
And yeah, and since, as you know in the book, it comes out that that Gertrude, Iowa was settled by German immigrants.
Hmm.
And so really I just took, and then being in northern Iowa and the agriculture there,
Hmm.
I this is probably a ridiculous reason to name a town in a book, but I just Google searched what's German for grain. And it came out, and I was like, well, that sounds like it could be a town's name. So I just threw it in there. So I pronounce it Gertrude, but I don't
Okay.
know. If you ever go to Gertrude, Iowa, I'm sure they could tell you, except it's
Uh,
a small
it's a
town.
fictional town, isn't it?
But in my head, they told me.
Oh, the voices in your head told you.
Yeah,
So I was interested that you made it a fictional town, and sometimes I can see a really good reason for using a fictional setting, but in this case, I think a real one would have worked just as well. So I'm curious what you see as the pros and cons, or why you chose a fictional town instead of just, Sheldon, Iowa.
well, I was already walking on thin ice, putting it in Iowa anyway.
Hmm.
But also, I guess when I started writing it, especially, I didn't, I don't outline my books. I have all the main ideas I'm going to work out in it,
Hmm.
but I really didn't know how dark it was going to be or how evil it was going to be. And
Hmm.
I didn't, I am always conscious of I don't want to offend a town. Um,
Okay.
but in my last book, my Gypsy War Diary, that was on a real town. It was my hometown, Norfolk.
Right.
And I think if you remember, I had a whole disclaimer at the end saying I didn't, no offense to the police department of Norfolk or the citizens, or because
Right. Right.
there are certain characters in there that were a little bumbling, maybe, and
Uh-huh.
and I always thought, well, if I make it a fake town, then I don't have to worry about any of it. I can just make
Mhm.
it as dark or as evil or
Right.
as as dim-witted characters in this town or whatever, and I'm not offending anyone. So
Right. Well, I thought it was very funny. One of our recent Books and Brews interviews with myself and Michael Agnew was with Jeff LaFerny, who's an author from Tennessee. And in his second book, he has like this full page disclaimer stressing this is just fiction. It's fiction. It's not real, guys. And I asked him about that, and he said, you wouldn't believe how many people don't seem to have a concept of fiction. And they ask him about his book, and he says it's time travel. And they go, well, time travel's not real. And he's like, it's fiction.
yeah, it's not a documentary.
I don't know whether to laugh or cry that someone would be upset that their town was used in a novel. I'd be like, oh, that's so cool. My town's in this novel. I don't care what happens in the novel. But
Yeah,
one of the other questions I had about the writing craft, a few more, I think you work as a copywriter, don't you?
I do. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so how do you, but you're on your fifth novel, you've had lots of short stories published in anthologies, magazines, things like that. You are now represented by a literary agent. How do you balance your job, your writing, marketing, family?
Actually, I need to be careful how I say this. The pandemic was a sucky deal,
Mm-hmm.
but good came out of it for me. It's become a lot easier for me to juggle everything since the pandemic
Mm-hmm.
because I have been told to work from home since then.
Okay.
So last year and a half, I get up in the morning and I just walk down to my basement, which is
Mm-hmm.
where I am right now. And this is
Yep.
where I work all day. And I know some people might go crazy with that, but it's perfect for me. I'm kind of an introverted person. I do
Mm-hmm.
have my family. It's not like I'm a complete hermit. And so I do have some interaction with humanity. But,
Uh,
the great thing is, and where I live, it's not a huge metropolis, but it is for Nebraska, I guess. I live in the
mhm.
Omaha metro area.
Okay.
It so I used to have to drive 20 minutes to work, and I had a
Mhm.
20-minute commute home. I'm sure if anyone's listening from like Los Angeles, they're laughing at that because it's way.
Right.
But so that's 40 minutes of my day just spent driving the car, and
Mm-hmm.
then on top of that, my lunch breaks, I'd have to go down to the lunchroom and log into the Wi-Fi and get
Mm-hmm.
on and whatever. So I'd lose some time there, and then just walking back and forth to my desk. Really, and then just just having everything right here, I've been
Mm-hmm.
able to jump back and forth between my writing and then my day job just
Mm-hmm.
instantaneously throughout the day, so I can get so much more done.
Right.
And um, it's just all little bits and pieces here and there. Technically, I'm supposed to have a 15-minute break in the morning along with an hour lunch break. Well,
Mm-hmm.
before when I was at work, 15 minutes isn't really enough time to do anything, so you just kind of hang out with a friend and talk for 15 minutes. But here, I could instantly go right from work to writing for 15 minutes and
Right.
back. So I mean, and you do that every week. I mean, that's over an hour of
It
extra
adds
time a
up.
week writing.
Right.
And
But I found the
so,
same thing.
sorry.
I said I found the same thing that because I lost my job teaching at the community centers, I was doing most of my teaching from home. So you're right. That's even though I didn't have a long commute either. I went to different community centers. So, some days it was 20 minutes, some days 25, but it really adds up.
Yeah. And,
You're,
again, I mean, oh, sorry, go ahead.
no, what were you going to say?
I was just going to say, I almost struggle to make it sound so positive. I mean, COVID-19 is a horrible thing that we've all gone through, but
Hmm.
how I see the light in that tunnel, I guess, is that it's been the life that I've always wanted, minus COVID, I guess.
Right, minus COVID. Well, but you know what? I think I've been doing a lot of editing for a writer named Ilona Perunikova, and she writes a lot about attitude, that it's all about attitude and finding the good in things. And I was just writing a blog piece today about why my book hasn't come out yet, the one I've been working on forever. And I said a similar thing, that a situation that could have been so incredibly stressful. My kids were kicked out of school, so I had three of them home all day. And then my son was kicked out of college, so that was the fourth one. And it could have been really stressful, but they all just pulled together. They enjoyed each other's company. I cleared out the garage so the boys could set up a workroom, and you make it work. But
Mhm.
you are now represented by an agent, and I'm curious what made you take that step to seeking out an agent, and how has it impacted your writing career?
Oh gosh, yeah. I mean, I did go out looking for an agent, and it was a process that took me 4 years really before I
Really?
actually get one. Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
I have the amount of agents I contacted and reached out, and just it's crazy. But I've got a great fit for my literary agent currently. The reason I was looking for it was there's some great indie presses out there, and there's some
Hmm.
great small publishing houses, and I've worked with quite a few of them. And by
Hmm.
quite a few, I mean I guess like just a couple, but um, always had great experiences. But everyone told me I've talked with a lot of bigger name authors. The one that comes to mind is David Weber. I don't know if you've heard of that name, but he's a huge
No.
science fiction writer. And I got to meet him a while back, and he said, your writing is not that bad; it's pretty good, but you need to
Hmm.
get a bigger audience. You need to be able to get
Hmm.
bigger houses that they're ever going to make. He writes for Tor Books, which is of course huge, and
Okay.
so he encouraged me to maybe look at getting an agent. So that's when I started looking into that, and it's just kind of been a process that took a number of years. Really a good experience in the long run because I learned what there's a number of agents that looked at me initially and said, well, we don't really want to represent you for this reason or because you're lacking this or whatever. And so one by one, I just corrected the things that they were saying needed to
Well
be fixed.
done. Uh-huh.
Yeah, and I ended up going on with Liverman Literary Agency. It's a smaller literary agency. Um, in fact, the agent that's named after Christopher Liverman is my agent, and he's just a really great guy. He's always trying to work hard for you, and
Hmm.
it's been really nice. And then we ended up getting this contract for Pets for Legion. So really excited to
That's
see what we got.
fantastic.
And
Yeah.
he, and we've already got the contract signed for my next book too,
Wonderful.
through Christopher, not through a publisher yet.
Okay, that is wonderful. Is it something that you would advise all writers do, or do you think it's more case by case decision to seek an agent?
Just overall, I think of every decision you make as a writer, I think should be very personal.
Hmm.
And as far as an agent specifically, it depends on what you want to do as a writer.
Hmm.
Myself, I kind of made the decision I want to see if I can get to the bigger publishing houses.
Right.
So I needed an agent to do that. Some writers don't really want that, and you lose something when you go there. You gain and you lose. If you go to a big
Right.
publishing house, you've got a bigger audience. You can get into the bookstores. You can get more publicity. They've got bigger budgets. But the
Right.
trade-off is you lose control, and some agents don't, or some writers don't like that.
Right.
With this, I was really happy with the cover design, but it was all done
Hmm.
by the publisher. I was really happy. Well, my name for one thing. I didn't ask them, "Could I please be Shawn David Brink?" They said, "You're going to be
Yeah.
Shawn David," and that's okay.
So you,
I didn't mind because I understand that that's part of what happens when you go to a bigger press. But some writers really love the control of having all that. They want
right.
to be able to say, "This is the cover I want, and this is how I want my name to look, and this is the font I want." And that's the advantage of going to smaller houses.
Mm-hmm.
It's so much
Yeah.
more artistically.
Those are some really good points, some really good things to think about. And so we're going to go back to, for the last question, the hard hitting one. And this is something what you and I had talked about in email, is that I think to every writer, and especially every Christian writer, you need to decide, we as writers need to decide how realistic do you let it get. You know, for instance, my books are set in a very violent, brutal time. Shawn is, to put it politely, very much kind of a playboy, you know. He's, how graphic do you get? You know, we all need to decide these things. How much do I really show war? How much do I show how brutal it is? You know, and there's this trade-off. And so in your book, there are some pretty horrible things happening. And I think that some people expect Christian fiction to be all love and light, or at the very least, very, very G-rated. So what were some of your considerations and how much to show the evil, and what are some of the pros and cons of more versus less?
It's a fine line to walk, definitely, as a Christian writer, because you especially when you're writing. I don't know how much of a genre this is, but I mean, I guess I would call Pet the Legion a Christian horror novel. When you're
Mm-hmm.
writing Christian horror, you're almost kind of buttering two things together that just don't mix very well.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you're writing horror, there's got to be horrific things to happen. That's where the name of the genre comes from.
Right.
And you have these horrific things are happening, and really, I guess every writer, whether you're Christian or not, you have to decide what line you're going to draw.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, as a Christian writer, I guess I don't mind writing the violence for one thing, but not glorifying the violence.
Mm-hmm.
It, the book is written towards an adult audience for sure. I don't think kids
Definitely.
should read it, but it's written from a Christian worldview, meaning that the violence is shown, it's coming from an evil thing, and the violence
Mm-hmm.
is 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 written as something that should not be done.
Right.
But I mean, and even then, you've got all that gray area where there's godly violence. I mean, Israelites attacked their enemies and were very
Right.
brutal, some of them.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just really it is difficult. But for me, I guess the violence isn't the the main issue as long as it's written correctly.
Mm-hmm.
And the same thing really goes for other subjects that don't normally fit into Christian fiction. I mean, um, it would be weird to have books where none of the characters are sexual beings,
Mm-hmm.
but we don't necessarily need to write graphic sex scenes. Uh,
Right. Right.
I think you've noticed in all of my books, really, um, and including Pets for Legion, people cuss and swear, but I don't use the words in my writing.
Right.
So there are ways to write that someone use foul language without actually writing the words.
Right. I thought Frank Peretti really excelled at that. I read a few of his books years ago, and in a way, I'd say, his style is a little bit similar to yours, or yours to him, since I guess he came first. But I thought he did an excellent job of portraying people who are very real, who are not perfect by any means, who swear like a sailor, whatever. But he didn't do it graphically, but you knew what was going on.
Exactly. Yeah, Frank Peretti is a great example.
Hmm.
Another author that I have read a lot on that I really admire is Ted Decker. I don't know if you've heard of him, but
Yes, yes. He has the trilogy. I read two of the books in that trilogy. What was it? Red, Green, and
yeah,
something like that. I liked that series a lot.
hmm and he's actually a little bit closer, I think, to what I write. Frank Peretti, great writer, but Ted Decker gets more into the dark side of things, I think.
Hmm. Right. I liked Ted Decker. I thought was a little less blatantly, this is Christian fiction. I thought he was a little more of the C.S. Lewis style, where it's a little bit allegory, not quite so blatant. But
Yes.
what's next for you? What are you
Uh,
on now?
I am just wrapping up the final draft for a book that the working title is Bound by Blood. And it's going to be in a similar vein as Pets for Legion.
Hmm.
It's a Christian horror novel.
Hmm.
Uh, different, totally different idea. It's about twin brothers. They grew up in an abusive household. They escaped that and it went their separate ways. One became a born again Christian. The other one became a leader of a satanic cult.
Oh wow.
And the idea is that they both are trying to essentially save the other by pulling them to your side of view. So
Hmm.
the satanic brother is trying for various reasons to bring the Christian brother over to his side and to join
Hmm.
him. And of course, the Christian has nothing in his heart except for wanting to save his brother from
Right.
damnation. So that's the general conflict. And of course, then you got all the supernatural and everything that I've written in it too. So,
Hmm.
but yeah, so that's going on. Then I have another novel in the initial draft called Tunnel Rat, and that's
Hmm.
actually going to be at least the way it is right now. It looks like it's going to be more of a secular horror novel.
Okay.
Um, and I've said this before to various people. I can't remember if I ever saying of your interviews, but I do consider myself to be a Christian that writes, but not necessarily a Christian writer.
Hmm.
Meaning that not everything I write is also going to be blatantly Christian fiction.
Right.
But again, it's going to have that idea that we already talked about, where the violence is going to be written a certain way, and the language and the sex and
Hmm.
everything to be written a certain way from a Christian worldview. And that's kind of what this next that novel is going to be.
Okay.
It's definitely horror, but it's not immoral. It's not erotica or anything like that. It's just going to be,
Yeah.
yeah,
Side funny story about erotica. I didn't think I'd ever say a phrase like that. A funny story about erotica. My husband and I had actually put out a book back in May where I started compiling some of the poems he's written over the years and some of the lyrics to his song. And on Draft to Digital, they don't have an option of poetry love poems. The only option that includes love poems is love and erotica. So I'm like, okay, well, they're love poems, and that's my only choice. So I picked that. And I got a notice the other day that my book was not allowed to be on, I forget whatever site it was, those Scribd. And I was like, what in the world? These are poems about sacrifice and honor, all these, deep, powerful ideas about what love really is. I'm like, this is the farthest thing from erotica. So I went on Scribd and I saw they listed it as erotica. I was like, so I took
that's
care of
really
that.
funny.
I was kind of dying, like I'm the last person in the world who's going to put out erotic poems. Um, and there it was. Apparently I had. So it has been great to talk to you again. And do you have any links where people can find you? Or I should say, what are your links where people can find you?
Yeah, so the main one that I would mention is my website, which you mentioned earlier, but it's ShawnBrinkAuthor.wordpress.com. If you do Google search Shawn D as in dog or David, I guess you all know
Mhm.
now. Shawn David Brink. Just use the D. It usually pops up right at the top of Google searches. And then if you go to that website, there's call to action buttons to my Facebook and my Twitter and everything else. So that's probably the best
Okay,
uh, central location to go to.
great. And do you have any upcoming events?
I will be. I'm still kind of digging myself out of the hole. We're not doing live in-person meetings.
Right.
I do have a number of events that I'm working on here locally for book signings, that sort of thing.
Okay.
Once I get books, I haven't actually gotten my personal supply of books, that's for Legion yet.
Okay. Okay.
Um, it's en route.
That's
And then And then I do have a number of other interviews that I'm doing right now, and different things. And that'll all be posted on my website as well under the tab
Fantastic.
events.
Okay. So I am Laura Vosica. You can find me at lauravosica.com and booksandbrews.net. Booksandbrews.net. And my only upcoming or ongoing events are that Gabriel Thorne is accepting new poetry in traditional forms, so that would be villanelles, sonnets, triolets, haikus, anything like that. We're accepting submissions for this year's poetry anthology, and the theme this year is love, and I will not list it as poems, love, and erotica. Learned my lesson. No erotica, please. So coming next week, we have, hopefully I will say her name right, Linda Wisniewski. It's a Polish name, I know that. And Linda is a former librarian who shares an empty nest with her retired scientist husband in Doylestown, Pennsylvania. She teaches memoir workshops and produces webinars for the Pearl S. Buck Writing Center. She was born in Amsterdam, New York, and is a graduate of SUNY at Buffalo and the library school at Villanova University. Her work includes fiction, memoir, and personal essays, and has been published in numerous literary magazines and anthologies, both print and online. Her credits include publications as diverse as the Philadelphia Inquirer, Massage, whatever that is, I'll have to ask her about that, The Quilter, the Christian Science Monitor, Gravel, and Foliate Oak. So, and there's more, I'll read more of her bio next week. So this has been episode 4. Now that life is settling down, I'm looking to get back to a weekly episode. So thanks for being my kind of inaugural restart. Would that make you like the re-inaugural?
Sure. Well, thanks for having me. It's really great being on your show.
I'd like to talk to you again.